Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This month on this channel, we are talking about self-esteem. And today I want to talk about the development of self-esteem for one of the family roles that has the hardest time coming to see themselves as a worthwhile and lovable person. And that family role is the role of the scapegoat. So if you're not familiar with what I mean when I say the term family role, or the role of the scapegoat in particular, I will link in the description of this video a series that I did a couple of years ago now, and it's crazy to think that I've been on YouTube long enough that I can link you series I've done a couple of years ago, but I digress, about what the family roles are, how we can recognize them, as well as a breakdown of some of the specific roles. And I will link the scapegoat video in particular. If you don't know what this term means, you're probably not going to be able to make a lot of sense out of this video, so I highly recommend that you go and watch that one first. Now, for those of you who do have more familiarity with dysfunctional family roles and the role of the scapegoat in particular, we're going to spend some time today talking about what's in the shadow of those who grew up as the family scapegoat. So back when I was doing my shadow work series, I started thinking kind of passively about what goes into the shadow for each of the roles in a dysfunctional family. So what gets disowned from our conscious awareness inside of each family role and becomes a part of how we kind of disidentify ourselves. So what traits or qualities do we instinctively look at and go, those are not me? And I was thinking about how for the family scapegoat, so the member of the family who was consistently told that they were the reason the family was so dysfunctional or why their parents were so unhappy, the things that go into the shadow are goodness, so the belief that the self is a good person who's worthy of love and respect and care. Truth, so their connection to what is actually happening is very frequently obscured because they're often a victim of gaslighting. And beauty, because the way that you come to think of yourself, if you're in this position of believing that you are the cause of everybody else's suffering for reasons that you do not understand, is you often come to think of yourself in a very derogatory way. And the way that you then present yourself to the world tends to stem from that self-derogating place. And it struck me as I was thinking about this that those traits that go into the scapegoat's shadow are the exact same terms that are known as the transcendentals in philosophy. So this is predominantly an exploration of psychology, not philosophy, but very quickly we're going to hark back to Thomas Aquinas, who had this idea that truth, beauty, and goodness were innate properties of being. So there was objective truth, beauty, and goodness to the way that the universe inherently functioned. And if you are a diehard philosopher, I will let you know that at this point, I'm going to start using these properties, goodness, truth, and beauty, less in their philosophical transcendental sense, and more as a metaphor for that which we need to connect with inside of ourselves in order to heal from something like early family scapegoating. So for the family scapegoat, healing is going to be about reconnecting with those virtues inside of yourself, because those are the virtues that have gone into your shadow and that you now believe you do not possess. So Aquinas proposed that we are experiencing truth when our mind is conformed to objective reality. And there is no human being out there whose mind is perfectly conformed to objective reality all of the time. However, there are ways to be much more aligned with what is true and much less aligned with it. And often when we are raised in a dysfunctional family system, the truth is seen as a threat. So we learn to disconnect from certain elements of it very early on. Goodness, through the lens of the transcendentals, is defined as that which is fulfilling its purpose. The tricky thing is that to figure out what our purpose is, we have to know what the truth is. And so if we grew up inside of a family system that cut us off from knowing the truth, it's also going to be really challenging to fulfill our unique purpose in the world. Which brings us to the last quality of beauty. So beauty, through the lens of the transcendentals, is thought of as that which is lovely. But more specifically, it's thought of as that which is harmonious and clear and which attracts us to the wholeness of something. So this isn't just about something being aesthetically pleasing. It's about having qualities in the way that something is presented that indicates to others I'm being drawn in towards the truth. And so you can start to see as we look at these things how they all interrelate. If we are disconnected from truth, it's going to be challenging to fulfill our purpose. And if we are not fulfilling our purpose, we are not going to be showing up as whole beings. And if we are not showing up from a state of wholeness, it's going to be hard to attract others towards us in a way that is authentic. And this is often exactly what we see happening for those who played the role of the family scapegoat. They internalized something that was not true about themselves, that the core of their identity was that they were a bad person who was wholly to blame for the pain and suffering of the people around them. And so then when they go out into the world and try to self-actualize and grow into their adult identity based on that core belief that I am broken and bad and I ruin people's lives without understanding how, they might be drawn towards situations that are not particularly healthy or growing because they believe that they are defective and unworthy of good things. And once again, the way we show up in the world, the way we present ourselves to others, the way we speak, the way we hold ourselves, is all very contingent upon who we believe ourselves to be at our core. So for the family scapegoat, having internalized all of those negative beliefs about the self bleeds into all of the actions they take later in life and the way they present themselves to the world, unless and until they start to realize that some of the things they have internalized about themselves are fundamentally not true. And that is where the healing process starts from. So for the rest of this video, we're going to go over those 3 virtues, and now I'm divorcing pretty heavily from the way that Thomas Aquinas and Plato and all of these other philosophers thought about the transcendentals, and I'm just going to bring this into the realm of psychology and how we can reconnect with each of these virtues on a personal level if we have been through something like early family scapegoating, in order to start seeing ourselves as people who are worthy of interacting with and internalizing ideas of ourselves as true, good, and beautiful. So one by one, let's look at how we start consciously reconnecting with each of those virtues. Starting with connecting to truth. Here are some things you may have internalized as the truth if you grew up in the family scapegoat role. 1. Many or all of my feelings are crazy, have no basis in reality, and or are indicative of me being a bad person. So anytime I want something, I am selfish. Or anytime I feel anger, it's proof that I am bad. So there's something inherently wrong with the fact that I experience certain feelings, period, even if I don't express them. Another thing you might have internalized is that the things that resulted from you being unable to cleanly express yourself, so things like addictions you may have developed, or mental illnesses that may have come into play down the line, are absolutely random, not connected to any of the experiences you've been through, and just problems you had because you are a bad person that brought further shame unto your family. You might believe that pain you experience is not real, and that anytime you're experiencing, and especially anytime you're expressing pain, whether that is psychological pain, emotional pain, or even real physical pain, you're being overdramatic and lying. You might believe that anytime something goes wrong in a relationship, it is your fault, regardless of the situation, regardless of what was at play between you and the other person. It must have been your fault if someone else is upset, particularly if they are upset with you. And one of the last troubling things you may have internalized that we're going to talk about today is the belief that the truth always hurts people. So when you are young and growing up inside of a dysfunctional family unit, you probably learned, if I tell other people how dysfunctional my family is, it's going to deeply hurt the members of my family. So you may have internalized this belief that love means keeping other people's secrets, including secrets about how they're behaving towards you. And what we're going to go over now is why all 5 of those beliefs are untrue. And in order to start healing from the family scapegoat role, we need to dismantle each of those untruths one by one. So dismantling that first belief, that there is something inherently wrong with the fact that you have certain feelings, means being willing to up your emotional literacy game and start giving your feelings the right name. So I have a video that I highly recommend you watch if this is something that you struggle with, that goes over how having toxic shame, which I would guarantee almost every early scapegoat experiences, leads to chronic dysregulation because we learn that there is something inherently wrong with certain feelings. However, the healing process begins with us learning to give feelings the right name. So if you think every time that I get angry, I am being bad, you are thinking inaccurately about your own feeling state. Anger is simply a piece of information that your body is giving to you about how it feels about the situation that it's in, or about the memories that the situation is bringing up. Anger is a perfectly healthy human emotion. How we deal with anger can be more or less destructive, of course. However, experiencing anger is not the same thing as being a bad person. So we need to parse apart those definitions. Or another one that a lot of scapegoated children experience is the feeling that wanting anything or asking anything from their parents or other people means that they are selfish. And this is another one we might need to unpair. The energy of desire, so wanting something that we currently don't have, and figuring out whether or not we can get it, is not inherently the same thing as selfishness. There are, of course, more pro-social and more anti-social ways of pursuing our desires, but the energy of desire itself is not something that is synonymous with selfishness. All feelings we experience are true by virtue of the fact that they are happening. They are being experienced by us. However, when we start putting judgment terms on top of emotions, we get into really murky territory. So what I want to encourage you to do in the healing process from the family scapegoat role is just notice which of your feelings you associate with which judgments about yourself. And as much as humanly possible, you want to start separating those things out for yourself cognitively. And again, I highly recommend checking out my video on chronic dysregulation as a result of toxic shame, because it goes over in a lot more detail how to do that. So that first action in getting closer to the truth is the act of giving all of our feelings the appropriate name. So looking at our feelings as raw sensations rather than as judgments. And the second step is learning to also give our coping mechanisms the accurate name. So instead of looking at our lives and going, I developed this addiction, or I behaved this way in my romantic relationships, or I chose this path that I consider to be dishonorable in many ways. What we want to start looking at those things as is compensatory mechanisms for healthy functioning. When we are not in touch with the truth, and when the goodness in us is not nurtured, what happens is we become chronically dysregulated, because it is a human need to think of ourselves as okay. So if we are chronically being told by the people whose care we are in that we are not okay, that there is something wrong with us, and that we are morally bad people, we are going to need to go to extremes to comfort ourselves, because that is extremely dysregulating to believe about yourself. So it is not surprising if we develop things like addictions or mental illnesses in response to that early experience of being scapegoated. And if we are blaming ourselves for the extreme measures that our brains and our bodies went to try to hold on to any shred of dignity that we could when we were going through that experience, we're actually going to be shaming the parts of ourselves that we're desperately trying to fight for our lives. Because make no mistake, fighting for your own dignity and self-esteem and desire to keep living is fighting for your life. Again, we may not love where we've been in life, we may not love the choices that we've made, but if we are shaming ourselves for what we did in the fight for our lives, we are shaming the part of ourselves that is probably the reason why we're still here. We can look at those things and call them what they were, which was coping mechanisms. And if we can acknowledge that that's what those were, it also frees us up to begin doing the work of choosing healthier coping mechanisms, or at the least lessening some of our shame around the fact that we might not yet know what those healthier coping mechanisms are. And that might just be a question that we need to learn to live inside of for a little while until the answer emerges. But saying we made the choices that we made in life because we are inherently bad is never accurate. So we need to start giving those choices their true name if we want to start reconnecting to this virtue of truth. The next thing we want to drop into and give some credit inside of ourselves is our own experience of pain. So once again, something you may have internalized if you were the family scapegoat is the idea that any pain you experience, either psychologically or in some cases even physically, is fake, and that you are always being dramatic, acting out, and making a big deal out of nothing when you are in pain. So you are often perceived by your family as being manipulative anytime you express pain. And so this might lead to you believing that even the pain you are directly experiencing is made up. The kind of double whammy here is that we can actually develop real symptoms of illness and pain as a result of the gaslighting that we have experienced around our feelings. And so all of this really starts to snowball. And the way that we want to stop it from snowballing and to reel it back in is to start giving our own emotional, psychological, and physical pain importance and value. There's another video I did on emotional neglect that I think is going to come in really handy here, because if you were scapegoated as a child, you were necessarily emotionally neglected. And so you might have this subconscious experience almost of waiting for someone to come along and tell you, hey, your pain is real. It exists. When in reality, you are the only one who knows for sure whether or not your pain exists. And here's a quick hack to figuring it out. If you feel it, it exists. If your body is in pain, that pain is real and it exists. Even if you don't know the accurate attribution for it, even if you go to many different doctors and none of them can figure out why you're in chronic pain, that does not mean the pain is not happening. It simply means you don't understand its attribution, but the felt sensation of it is real. And the same is true for emotional and psychological pain. You might not know the accurate attributions for those pains, but if you are in emotional pain, you are in emotional pain. Full stop. Your subjective experience of it is what makes it true. Same goes for any sort of mental illness or psychological pain. Again, it might take some work to figure out how that pain connects to your objective external environment, but the pain itself is real by virtue of it being felt in your subjective inner world. And to heal from that scapegoat role often means being the person who is willing to not only acknowledge your own pain, but to advocate for it. To go to doctors and go, I don't care that you don't know what this is, the symptom is real, and I need to keep digging. To seek out mental health resources for yourself, or environments you can put yourself in that are emotionally enriching during the times when you need support, even if it doesn't look to other people like you need support. Because you may have learned to hide your feelings very well, because showing your feelings often led to severe consequences. So others might think that you are fine when you are not. You might have to look at someone like your therapist or psychologist and tell them, I know you think I'm not in pain, but I am, and I need you to take it seriously. You might need to educate people on why that is. I learned to hide my emotions from a very young age, and now it's very instinctive for me. So it might not look like I'm in distress, but I am, and I need help. I'm just full of video recommendations, but there's another one I have called CPTSD from Resentment to Self-Advocacy Inside of Relationships that I will link in the description of this one. It goes over exactly that, how we can start to educate other people and advocate for ourselves about the ways in which we're in pain or need help, despite the fact that we might not be showing it the same way other people do. Which leads naturally into that next thing we may have internalized as true that was not true, which is that anytime something goes wrong inside of a relationship, it is necessarily our fault. And this often runs so deep for people who are scapegoated that they have no idea they hold this belief. But what might continue happening is you might continuously find yourself having intimate relationships, so romantic relationships or close friendships, as you go through life, with people who naturally externalize blame. And then because you have that natural inclination to go, yes, you're right, this was my fault, when someone is putting blame onto you, you often don't even have that moment that the average secure person has, where they check in with themselves and go, do I think that this blame kind of fits the situation? Or were some wires getting crossed here? You're more likely to simply accept the blame because you have that deep belief that you are a bad person who hurts other people without realizing how, and simply apologize or fawn over the person who is blaming you. And this is, of course, not to say that you are faultless for everything that happens in relationships, but it is definitely true that you are not the problem 100% of the time. In any relationship, there is a dynamic interplay of how both people are showing up. And both people need to be willing to adjust the way that they're communicating with each other for the relationship to function healthily. But again, if you are a victim of early scapegoating, it means that you were often taught that the only way to keep yourself safe was to comfort and apologize to the person who is harming you. And the easiest way to lessen the cognitive dissonance around this is to internalize that belief that you really did have intent to hurt this person every single time, even if you don't really understand why, or that doesn't really make sense to you if you were to sit down and investigate that belief. It's easier to just internalize, I am bad, I am wrong, I hurt people by virtue of who I authentically am, and so anytime something goes wrong in a relationship, I am to blame. Now, the caveat here is that, of course, if you have a lot of trauma, you might have a harder time in relationships than the average person. You might have more triggers. You might have more things that come online that make healthy relating difficult for you. But this is a significantly different reality from the reality of I am a bad person who ruins people's lives. And I feel very passionately about this because I think it's one that it's so hard to break the pattern of. Because you can always find the exception. You can always find the one thing you did wrong and go, see, I knew it. It is my fault that the entire relationship is a mess. When in reality, one thing you did wrong is one thing you did wrong. And people do wrong things chronically in relationships, and in a healthy, secure dynamic, you will do things wrong. And when you explain that to your partner, they will not tell you that you are the cause of all of their unhappiness. They will deal with the one thing you did wrong, and you will heal from it as a pair, and you will move forward. And the other person will also be willing to come to you with things that they have done wrong, and you will be able to forgive each other. But it will be in equal exchange. This is likely a really hard one to overcome, so I do recommend Codependence Anonymous and Adult Children of Alcoholic and Dysfunctional Families as free support groups that exist in most major cities as well as online that look directly at how we distort relationships based on our early experiences. And ACOA, or Adult Children of Alcoholic and Dysfunctional Families, actually goes specifically into family roles and how something like being scapegoated is going to impact your experience of intimate relationships as you grow up. So those are really great free resources that you can access if you don't have someone like a counselor or therapist who can help you unpack all of this stuff, or if you don't have friends and family who are safe people for you to talk to. And the last thing we're going to go over when it comes to reconnecting with truth is this idea that truth in and of itself is a harmful concept. There are, of course, better and worse ways to communicate truth so that it actually gets through to people and makes the right impact. But truth itself is a completely neutral concept. Everything just is the way it is. And there is nothing bad about seeing things as they are or saying how things are. Of course, saying how things are might lead to specific consequences. If, as a child, you had spoken to outsiders about how your family treated you, maybe you would have been either removed from the family unit or you would have been severely punished by the people inside of the family unit. Or that narrative that was getting pushed on you that you were crazy might have been doubled down on. So again, there can actually be this kind of fear response that comes up for people who've experienced early scapegoating around the truth. They may have internalized that the kind and pro-social thing to do, the way to get by in the world, is to lie through your teeth. John Bradshaw calls this the no-talk rule in dysfunctional families. So the idea that there is this implicit contract that anything that is weird or off in your family does not leave the family. To the outside world, everyone must act as though the family unit is nice and normal and completely functional. And what's interesting is that with more secure families, you actually see them being a lot more open about the things that are going wrong inside of the family unit and about things that each individual person is struggling with. So when you're talking to a secure parent, they're likely to be pretty open about what's happening inside of the family, including which relational conflicts are happening, in a way that shows that they understand the complexity of those situations. So you might hear a more secure parent talking about the conflicts they have with their kids with an understanding of the developmental level their child is at, as well as the pressures and challenges that that child is going through. So maybe they're transitioning into teenhood, and the secure parent is having a lot more conflict with their child than they normally would. And you're likely to hear them acknowledge some form of, well, that's a really tough age. And in all honesty, I'm struggling a bit with the feeling of them pulling away from me. And so we're both going through growing pains in our relationship with each other. Whereas when you have a dysfunctional family unit and you have a parent who is scapegoating one child, what you're going to hear is a lot about that child's issues and all of the drama and trouble they are causing for the family, and next to nothing about what normal challenges that child might be struggling with. The parent might be all too happy to tell you about all of the mental illnesses they think their child has, but little to nothing that implies they are having normal reactions, particularly that they might be having normal reactions to the parent. So you'll hear a very one-sided narrative. And if you were that scapegoated child, you got so used to hearing that one-sided narrative that you may never have learned that there are people who do prioritize and value the truth inside of relationships, and who actually want to sit down and figure out, okay, I don't see something from your point of view. So you tell me what's true for you, or what you perceive to be the truth, and I'll tell you what's true for me, or what I perceive to be the truth, and we'll work together towards a common understanding. This is what in attachment theory we call an understanding of complex causation, and it's a characteristic that comes naturally to secure people. They understand that if there's significant conflict happening between them and someone else, there's two sides to it, and there is almost definitely something they're not seeing, as well as something the other person isn't seeing. So resolving conflict is the act of getting together and figuring out what the truth that is being missed in the middle is. But again, in these dysfunctional family units, there is an unwritten rule that there are things you are not supposed to acknowledge as true. So John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, has this one essay that is called On Knowing What You Aren't Supposed to Know and Feeling What You Aren't Supposed to Feel. And that title gets about as close as academic psychology ever has to deep poetry, in my opinion, because it so perfectly and eloquently captures the challenge of anyone growing up in a dysfunctional family system, particularly those who are more in touch with the truth of what's happening inside of that system. You know things you are not supposed to know, meaning you know things that you know you would get in trouble or reprimanded for knowing. And you feel things that you would be reprimanded or that you feel as though you are not supposed to feel. So getting back in touch with the truth as we heal from family scapegoating is the act of convincing ourselves that there is nothing we ought not to know and nothing we ought not to feel. Knowing things and feeling things are inherent parts of our nature that we cannot control. We can control, of course, what we do with the things we know and feel, but we cannot control the knowing and the feeling themselves. So realigning ourselves with reality means accepting that there is nothing inherently bad about truth, which is likely the exact opposite of what you originally internalized. All right, that was the quality or virtue that I wanted to spend the most time on, that virtue of truth, because I believe that reconnecting to goodness and beauty are a natural consequence of starting to live inside of the truth. But this might not be what you believe if you grew up as the family scapegoat. Often in a family that has one child as the scapegoat, there is another child who is seen as the golden child. At a first glance, it looks like a favorable role because the parent who is projecting all of their own negative qualities onto the scapegoated child projects all of their positive qualities onto the golden child. So the golden child is showered with praise and attention and resource. However, the kind of implicit contract they are given is, you must seem perfect all of the time. You must perfectly reflect upon me, the parent, as a perfect parent. You must go out into the world with all of my values, and you must make me look good to other people. And if you are the scapegoated child, you might think that those are the only two options. You can be all bad, or you can be all good, which may have been the perception that you had of the golden child in the family, because that was likely the family narrative around that child, that they were all good and could do no wrong. So to start reconnecting with the goodness inside of yourself, you first have to ditch that idea that goodness is equivalent to the appearance of perfection. Goodness does not mean that you never make a mistake, but that's what you might think if you were overpunished for every mistake that you make. Goodness also does not mean being able to redeem or save other people, but you might believe that if you were told that you are responsible for someone else's unhappiness. Because what's the flip side of that belief? If you could be responsible for someone's misery, it also implies that you have the power to make them perfectly happy. And this is likely a belief that will draw you towards a ton of codependent relationships later on if you don't get clear on the truth. The truth is that goodness is not about perfection, and you are not a god who has the power to magically fix other people's dysfunction, trauma, and misery. Goodness is simply the act of living in alignment with truth as much as it's possible to do so. And again, this might feel so wrong to you because what you were taught is that goodness is about denying the truth as much as humanly possible. So you might think the only way I can ever be good as an adult is if I can find some way to either completely erase my past, which may include a history of dysfunctional relationships, addictions, antisocial behaviors, all of which, again, cropped up as means of you dealing the best way you knew how with that early scapegoating. You might think the only way I can ever redeem myself and be good is if I find a way to distance myself from everything I've done and present myself as someone I am not, someone who I imagine in my head when I think about what it means to be a respectable, good citizen. For you, as for everybody else in life, goodness is not about detaching from who you are and the experiences you've had, including if some of the experiences you had were genuinely quite antisocial. Goodness is about getting to the truth of why all of that happened and living in integrity. So being willing to say, I did X, Y, and Z, and I understand how that hurt other people, and so I don't do X, Y, or Z anymore. Integrity and goodness is not a detachment from what you've done. It's a contextualization of what you've done, which gives you the freedom to decide how you will behave going forward. So you can live a highly respectable and virtuous life that includes a long history of behaviors and experiences you're not proud of and would not want to repeat. If you can learn to understand and contextualize why all of that happened and have empathy for yourself, now you are bringing yourself into the world as a person who has much more empathy than the average person, because you're able to have empathy for experiences that other people do not even remotely understand and cannot help but judge because they have not been through them themselves. And so your willingness to contextualize, make sense of, and give yourself empathy for your own past can end up bringing you into the world as someone who now has a superpower. So once again, fulfilling your purpose and stepping into your goodness is not about detaching from yourself. It's about integrating all parts of yourself and developing the type of empathy for yourself that you were once never given. I cannot emphasize enough how rare it is to be able to do that and how important it is for people to learn to do that. I truly believe this is one of the most important things that humans are lacking. And on some levels, I even believe we have a social responsibility to do this kind of healing work and to find that empathy for ourselves and to live our lives out of it. Because that's the way we become deeply pro-social people who pass on the forgiveness and love that we extend to ourselves to everybody we come in contact with. And this brings us all the way to that last transcendental of beauty. And once again, when we talk about beauty through the lens of the transcendentals, we're not just talking about aesthetics. We're talking about the qualities of harmony, clarity, and integrity. And the argument is that beauty is that which brings you in closer to the truth. So this is about an energy that we exude as people who live in alignment with our own integrity. When we stop abusing ourselves and we learn to hold ourselves with dignity and treat our bodies with dignity and treat other people with respect rather than with suspicion and guardedness, we instantly become more beautiful versions of ourselves. It doesn't matter if our physical appearance does not change. There is beauty in the way that we show up in the world as people who've accepted ourselves and who have learned the practice of deep empathy. So this means not conforming to what we think beauty should look like, but really tuning into ourselves, including all of the pain and challenge we have gone through in our life, and going, how do I display all of that with empathy and clarity, and in a way that exists in harmony with other people? The most beautiful way of existing in the world for someone who has gone through early scapegoating is to finally begin living and holding yourself and approaching relationships as though you are not sorry for existing. Because at the core of the wounded scapegoat is that belief, I should not exist. There is something wrong with the fact that I exist. And when we actually learn to get in touch with the truth of who we are and start fulfilling our purpose and finding our goodness and reconnecting with the parts of ourselves that believe, actually, I do deserve to live. I do deserve to exist. And not only am I not sorry for it, I am grateful for my own existence. Because I know that I've transformed all of that pain I experienced into a commitment to the truth and to living in harmony with other people in a non-destructive way. And often what happens is we do naturally start treating ourselves better when we have that belief that I am a good person who deserves to exist. We start feeding ourselves healthy food that actually facilitate our energy and our life force. We start engaging with healthier relationships that highlight the best qualities within us. We choose jobs and situations to put ourselves in that allow us to grow into continuously stronger and more empathetic versions of ourselves. And when we are living like that, we shine. But all of this starts with being willing to reconnect with the truth and choose to live inside of that belief that we deserve to be here. All right, I'm going to leave that here for today. I do want to note that this is a really heavy topic because it does deal with very concerning early childhood experiences for most who've gone through this. So I'm going to leave some additional resources in the link of this video. I'm not going to leave mental health resources simply because depending on where you're tuning in from in the world, your best bet is going to be doing some Google searches of which mental health care providers are available in your region. But if any part of this video was particularly triggering for you, I highly advise chatting with a mental health professional in some capacity who can help you start to integrate your experiences. I also heavily recommend Rebecca Manville, who is an author and a coach who also runs an excellent YouTube channel on recovering from early childhood scapegoating. I will recommend a bunch of her stuff in the description of this video if you want to find out more and go really deep with this topic in particular. As always, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.